right back here live in the studio. The program is Viewpoint. And our guest this morning is Mr. Greg Patterson, who has a very important job, one that not everybody's cut out for. You have to have a lot of compassion, a lot of caring. We're talking about hospice care, and he particularly represents Safe Haven Hospice Care. The offices are located here in Lincoln. They are above what was known as the old Avery and Comstock building, right catty corner from the post office there. But those are the physical offices. Then through that area, then you find places to send patients who have been recommended for hospice care. Now, does the doctor specifically call, or the nurse in this case, your office there?
That's
and
correct.
That's how the process starts.
That's what that phone call is basically. We call that a referral, and a referral is simply a name of a patient and a location and a contact. And once we get that information, that's really all we need to get the ball rolling.
And you used the term earlier in the program, too late. And optimally, what would be the best time for a patient who definitely is not going to make it, will die? 3 months, 2 months, 5 months?
Probably 6 months or less to live if the disease runs its normal course. I would just use the Medicare statement. The national average is about 70 days, so about 2.5 months. That's what the average is, and that's been going up every year for 20 years.
But talk about the type of services that hospice does provide, because I think that proves that for the sake of the patient, it's better that you get on the stick earlier rather than later.
Right. Well, specifically talking about that, I would focus on then the chaplain services, the social services, and the bereavement services. Bereavement starts upon admission. So when a patient is admitted into the hospice program, immediately we begin the bereavement program, which is a program that follows the patient's family for 12 months after the patient passes. So that's the program, yes, and that includes...
It's a post-death program.
That is correct, and that's directed at the family, the people, the loved ones of the patient. So that's where I would start with. That's why I believe it's so important to get in early, because you can begin that bonding process to the family, to the staff, and so that if they do have issues, if the patient family do have issues, then they can get addressed and get addressed quickly and comfortably with someone that they already know and respect.
So is it safe to say that the families are as much beneficiaries of the hospice program as a patient per se?
It is. My father was on hospice services when he passed away about a year ago. And the family does benefit, because we have been called lots of things, but one of the things that we've been called is we guide people through this process. We know what our nurses are very well trained. They know what to expect, and they can, so to speak, coach the families. This is what is going to happen next, and this is what's going to happen next. So when things start happening, there's no surprises, there's no anguish. Oh gosh, is this unusual? What's going on? And we kind of help them through that process.
Now, is this process the duration of the patients being with you, or is this following the death of the patient?
It's actually both. The process, working with the patient on what to expect. This is what we talk about during the patient's life. Then after the patient dies, we talk about what you could expect for your own grieving, and then we help people through that process.
Do you ever meet people who don't necessarily think that in a given instance death isn't the enemy?
Yes, we do. We meet people like that.
Do they grieve?
I think there's always grief, because there's always people left behind. So I think there would always be grief, even if your faith, even if you're convicted that after this there's a much better life. I think there's always going to be some sense of loss and grieving because of who you're leaving behind. We had one patient that was a grandmother, and she was surrounded by her family, and she was laying in bed, and she was just lingering on. But there was a grandson who was kind of like the black sheep of the family, and they were waiting for him to get out of prison. And so she was just, and it seemed like she was just waiting for something. He walks into the room, and this is an unusual case, I admit, but he walks into the room. The grandmother, who'd been laying in bed the whole time, sits bolt upright, gives him a hug, lights up, smiles, gives him a hug, lays down, and she dies. We don't understand much about death. You know, predicting that 6 months or less to live is really difficult, and we can't do it with any degree of accuracy. But we have more control over that than I think most people understand.
But with
6-4, I'd like to announce the number, Judy, if I may, please.
Sure, please.
Somebody might have some questions, Mr. Greg Patterson, Safe Haven Hospice, very important, affects each and every one of us. 648-5510. If anybody has any questions and or comments, Mr. Patterson would be very happy to take that call. 648-5510. Go ahead, Judith Kay.
I
catch you.
it.
Oh, she's ready.
Okay. Well, I'll continue on with your thread. What kind of services we offer? So I talked about the chaplaincy, the bereavement services, and the social services, and they're really focused a lot on not only just the patient, but on the patient family as well. Our nurses are responsible for pain management. So if there's any pain, we're going to take care of that. You know, pain is a relentless tyrant. So we will take care of that. 95 to 98% of most pain can be managed, keeping the patient comfortable without sedation. So there's really
without sedation.
Without sedation. There's really no need to fear painful death these days because of our medications.
Yeah, I think one of the sad things to see is a patient in a torpid state, just laying there, you know, existing, and perhaps in pain and not able to communicate where the pain is.
It is, and so there's no need for fear of that. There are side effects from some medications. We also have other comfort medications to, you know, if the patient's anxious, we can make the patient comfortable. We pay for 100% of the items related to the terminal diagnosis. So, for example, a patient has lung cancer.
You pay for it?
We pay for that. That's what the hospice benefit covers. So we would pay for, in the lung cancer case, we would pay for nebulizer treatments. We would pay for the pain medications to make them comfortable. Whatever other drugs that were related to that lung cancer, we pay for. Our nurses would come in and create the care plan for that patient and decide the course of care. Our hospice aides will come in and bathe the patient and take care of their personal needs, doing their hair, doing their nails. We can do things like that.
It came back to me, too. The business of 6 months that we keep making reference to, that's a policy, a governmental policy, right?
That's correct.
But that's not a definite thing. Hospice won't quit the day after the 6 months is up.
That's correct. Most people don't realize that the hospice benefit is unlimited.
Right.
By law.
It could end up being 2 years.
It could be 2 years. As long as the patient continues to meet criteria, continues to be eligible and appropriate for hospice care based on, the review of the medical history, then that patient can stay on hospice program. There's no penalty to the doctors for early referral. If a patient is referred to the hospice, quote, too soon, according to Medicare, if Medicare were to come in and look at that chart and say, this was too early, there's no penalty on the physician on the referral, whether it comes from a nursing home or whatever, for an early referral. The penalty will ultimately fall back on hospice. They have what's called a hospice cap, a Medicare cap, that tries to kind of put a cap because you don't want to be spending dollars for hospice that really aren't necessary. And so it's an appropriate kind of limitation.
What are the criteria, Greg?
Well, every single disease will have its own criteria. I'm not a clinician, so I can't go into the detail, but for example, there could be certain, one criteria could be weight loss, 10% weight loss in the past year. One criteria could be oxygen dependency, which would be defined as on 2 liters or more of oxygen. Another criteria could be activities of daily living, ADLs, where there's a decline in the patient's ability to take care of themselves. Frequent falls is another, what I'll call hospice triggers. And what these mean, that just because these things are present, that doesn't mean that the patient needs hospice right then. But it probably means that it's time for an evaluation. It's time to pick up the phone, call hospice. We'll come out and we'll do a free evaluation. we prefer to get a doctor's order, so the patient may need to talk to their doctor first to get that physician's order. We will need a doctor's order to admit that patient. Come out and do a free evaluation, free consulting. We don't have to admit the patient. We can go out there, talk to the family, and if they're not ready for hospice, that's fine. We'll say, okay, that's fine.
Now, is that your job, Greg?
No, that's not my job.
Not your job.
No.
You have people who are trained, and they're the point people to do that very thing.
That's correct. Our nurses will do that. Our social workers do that. Our chaplains. We have other staff as well.
After you've done this evaluation, do you contact the doctor, or do you tell the family that maybe they might want to think about this service, and in that event they can contact their doctor? How do you work that?
Well, typically by the time we've contacted the family, we're pretty far along in the process and had that evaluation. We will contact their doctor. We will let them know, and what we find out, their doctor then has to sign that same certification statement stating that the patient has 6 months or less to live if the disease runs its normal course. So their doctor will sign that statement. Our hospice medical director will sign that statement. And at that point, the patient, and once they sign a consent, they elect hospice care, then they are a hospice patient. Another misunderstanding, another myth out there is that hospice is irreversible. It's not. Let's say a patient, this sounds too good to be true, but it's a try it, you'll like it kind of thing, and it's kind of surprising for most people. You can come into hospice one day, and you could get scared and revoke the next day, go back into hospice again the next day, go back out the next day. There's no limitation on that kind of movement. So you sign a statement electing hospice, but you can revoke that statement anytime you want. What's interesting about this, and this is what will give you evidence that what I said is exactly right, that people want to keep that hospice. When a patient first comes on hospice, initially they do improve, and sometimes they improve to the point where we have to discharge them from the hospice program, or we say graduate them from the hospice program. When that happens, you'd think there would be relief. There isn't. They're so accustomed to the services, they love the care, that they protest, and we assist them in that protest. There's actually a process of appealing a decision by a hospice company to discharge a patient because they've improved. Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
And what are your chances of success in that?
Probably not good, because the hospice does not want to discharge that patient either. But they know in order to be compliant with Medicare rules and regulations, if the patient doesn't meet criteria, then we have to discharge them. We're required to by law to discharge them. So, we're doing everything we can to keep that patient on service because we want to provide that care to them. But there is a process to appeal that.
Greg, this week, if you had a referral to a bona fide candidate for hospice care, and there was no room at the inn in the county, so to speak, do you find other places outside the county for this? What is the modus operandi there?
Okay. Well, let me kind of take a little bit higher view than that, and I want to look at the levels of care of hospice. There's 4 levels of care of hospice. Most people are familiar with 2 of them. The first one is called routine home care, and that's where the hospice nurse will go into the patient's home, into their assisted living, into the nursing home, whatever, and will provide that care. So that's the first level. That's what most people consider hospice care. The second level is what you call, no room at the inn. That's called general inpatient care. And what that means is typically a patient, when they're actively dying and close to the end of life, what they will do is go to what's called a hospice house or an inpatient facility. Now, we have contracts with a number of buildings, and that building could be an assisted living, not assisted living, a skilled nursing facility, or a hospital, or a hospice house, where that they can actually go in and they will receive that inpatient care at that facility. We've never run into a problem where there's no room at the inn, so we haven't had that problem. The other 2 levels of care are inpatient respite. And what that is when a family needs a break. Let's say the patient's home and when you're taking care of a loved one at home who is dying, it's a huge burden. It's a huge sacrifice. It's a huge, to me, it's an incredible giving of oneself, but it is wearing. And so in order to give that patient's family a break, they offer what's called respite services, where the hospice will pay for care for that patient in a nursing home for 5 days. to give the family a break, so they can go on vacation, they can just rest, they can just take a break. Take a break.
Period.
Yeah. The fourth level of care is called it's technically called continuous care. I don't like that term. It's not appropriate because it leads the impression of 24-hour, 7-day care. It's not. It's really crisis care. So, and it requires a minimum of 8 hours of care per day, where our hospice nurse or hospice aide will sit for a combined total of 8 hours a day minimum during a period of acute symptoms being out of control.
By its very nature, hospice would require immediacy on the part of the hospice organization.
Correct.
If I called you, it would have to be now. It can't be when you get around to it in 6 weeks.
Right. We have a policy, and this is where every hospice company is different. We have 5,000 companies out there. Everyone is different. We all have to follow the same Medicare rules and regulations, but we have a policy that we will admit within 3 hours of receiving that referral if we have a doctor's order to admit. Sometimes the challenge is to get the doctor's approval, particularly if it's after hours. The challenge could be getting with a family. Sometimes some of our patients will have power of attorney, so to get with that family member, they could be out of town, they could be out of state. So we have to fax the documents and get them faxed back. But we will admit within 3 hours if we have the family approval and the doctor's certification. And that's 24/7 again. You can call us Friday at 6 o'clock and we'll be there.
Well, that's interesting because it's kind of my experience that Friday at 6 o'clock is not an optimum time to begin any medical search.
She knows firsthand. I mean, definitely firsthand.
It's not the optimum time, but the hospitals, for their sake, they have to discharge these patients, and they prefer to discharge them, before they come into the weekend. So actually, Fridays happen to be a very busy time for us because of that. But we're not gonna put you off and say, well, can you call back on Monday?
Yeah. In this cruel world, we have here the ever-present problem of funding. This is not an inexpensive operation that we run here, the hospice program. Whence cometh the various sources for the funds?
Okay. And we started down that path a little bit ago.
Yeah,
Medicare.
I wanted to follow through on that.
Okay. Medicare pays about 95% of hospice care, and then Medicaid and private insurances will pay the balance. We also have what's called charity care, and we actually provide, if the patient meets certain financial criteria, meaning they don't have the income to support, they don't have insurance or whatever, we actually will provide charity care to a patient, free care. Going to the Medicare, Medicare recognizes that hospice saves the government money, because if you think about it, it really makes sense. We neither hasten nor delay death. So if a patient is on expensive chemotherapy and they decide to go to the hospice, they're going to elect to forego that expensive treatment. So that's a savings right there. Typically, we try to be the patient's 911. We want to be their 911. So if there's an emergency, they need to call us. Somebody will call. We answer our calls immediately, and we will respond to a call within 15 minutes. So if a patient is experiencing dire symptoms, we will call immediately. We will get back to that patient immediately. They will call our hospice number. We call back within 15 minutes. And typically, we have what we call comfort packs. And what these are medications that are located in facilities that we have contracts with, so in a patient's community. So if there's an urgent need for medication, we don't have to wait on a doctor's script. We don't have to wait on the pharmacy filling that script and then delivering that medication. We already have these orders in place that we can go to, pick up that medication, and be there quickly to the patient's home to make them comfortable.
Excuse me, I'm confused on this charity care because I don't understand insurance, I guess. If you don't have Medicare or private insurance, you'd probably have Medicaid, wouldn't you?
you may have Medicaid, and Medicaid does pay for it, but you may not be Medicaid eligible or Medicare eligible, or not have the insurance coverage.
Huh. I still don't get it. Slow, right? Is there a hospice house, an actual facility for hospice care that's in this area?
I think there's one down in Springfield. I haven't been to it, and I know that OSF up in Peoria just completed a hospice house.
Is this one in Springfield affiliated with St. John's? It's right across the street.
I'm not really sure. I don't know.
Yeah, I knew it was there. Mm-hmm.
It's something that I would like to follow up on. We have contracts with several campuses. One in Springfield, one in Decatur, one in Lincoln, one in Peoria, that provide inpatient care, but they're not hospice houses. They do provide that general inpatient level of care, which requires a 24/7 RN.
Okay. I'm sure, though, that St. John's does have something, because they wanted to move Buzz there, but it was too late.
Greg Patterson, we appreciate very much your presence with us this morning. We've kind of played E-tag trying to get back and forth to set this date up, and we're glad we could work this out. It's my feeling, Judith Kay, that this conversation should have been well received in our community. Information about which most of us know absolutely nothing.
Exactly.
Hopefully, it's only that we are better informed. We don't have to use it personally. But we appreciate your presence. It was difficult this morning. I always try to come up with something to close a program with, and this morning a little more tougher job. But I found something about hope. Pretty basic, something we all know about. Everyone knows better than he hopes. Thank you for Viewpoint. Greg Patterson, thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Appreciate your time. Thank you.